Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I am the American historian, Alan Searcy. Glad you guys are here today. Got some really fun, wild stuff to talk about. So, hey, before we get started, Christmas is right around the corner. Below the trestle, my Popelet Goat Man, Popelet Goat Monster, whatever you want to call it, the book about the creature up there in Louisville that throws the people off the trestle. It makes a great stocking stuffer. If it's perfectly in a stocking, you can wrap it, put it under a tree. Someone's going to be really happy with you on Christmas Day. Also, the Resurrection Knox Martin, all my books, they fit perfectly in a stocking. Check them out. They're all free to read on Kindle Unlimited. You can listen to them for free, I think, on the Audible Premier plan. So yeah, they're all online. Check them out. Lots of good reviews. A lot of weird, wild stuff. It's kind of what I do. And hey, you're listening to the show today. You found us on Spotify, on Apple Podcast. Leave a review. Be sure to subscribe. I appreciate you guys. Follow Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook, on Instagram. I'll be dropping ghost stories on my Twitter account, ATO Allen, Alan Searcy. Find me on there. Been dropping 2 ghost stories every day since September. So I've been asking you guys to send me questions or just things you want me to talk about. And I was going to wait and do an episode in January, but you guys kind of got ahead of me, and I'm getting so many questions and responses. I'm going to go ahead and maybe just answer maybe one a week to kind of get ahead of this because I'm getting so many questions. So the one I got the other day, I've been to this place, so it's easy to talk about. Cindy E. sent me something on Instagram. She said she stayed at the Netherlands Plaza in downtown Cincinnati, and she wanted to know if I heard about the ghost story about the Green Lady. So actually, I stayed there several years ago. I've got a book on Cincinnati, Ghost Stories and Graveyard Tales, Cincinnati. And I know all about what the staff there calls her the Lady in Green. I guess she could be the Green Lady, whatever you want to call her. And supposedly, the staff members there, everybody knows about her. She was actually photographed on the 25th floor by a guest in May. I think it was 2022 or 2023. I was talking to a staff member one day when I stayed there, and I was asking about the ghost stories. I'd heard things. That's why I was there. And he pulled out his phone and showed me a lady in a green dress, just kind of as clear as day, that she seemed to be out of place from like another time, another era. But he said that a guest sent it to him. He said he couldn't send it to me because he was the one who took the picture, which, I totally get, but that'd be kind of cool to have. So the story there with the lady in green, on May 26, 1930, Joseph Lurick, he was a 34-year-old electrician. He was there at the hotel installing electrical equipment in an elevator shaft on the 6th floor. He reached down to grab a screwdriver, and when he did, he lost his balance, and he slipped and fell all the way down the elevator shaft. It killed him instantly, as you would imagine. So there's different stories about what happened next and the Green Lady, who it is. Well, the legend has it, his heartbroken wife came to the hotel either that night or a day or two later, and she just didn't want to go on without her husband, and she also jumped down the elevator shaft. So since then, they've seen her all around the hotel. They've seen a lady in the green dress in the ballroom. They call it the Hall of Mirrors. It's a really pretty ballroom from the early 20th century. She's been spotted in the elevators, as well as other parts of the hotel, downstairs in the gym. They've seen her. So, yeah, it's really wild and weird, but there's a green lady there, or a lady in green, at the Netherlands Plaza, the real opulent hotel downtown Cincinnati. If you want to read more about it, Ghost Stories and Graveyard Tales, Cincinnati. That's my Cincinnati book. Came out several years ago. It's one of my favorite books. There's some wild stuff in Cincinnati. A lot of grave robbing. But anyway, so enough of Cincinnati. Today, I want to head to St. Louis. But first, I got to back up to kind of give some background on what exactly we're talking about today. I'm talking about spiritualism. Have you guys heard about spiritualism? Mediums, séances. So, spiritualism, it was a thing before the Civil War and really exploded after the Civil War. Spiritualism emerged in the 1840s. It was a cultural phenomenon that blended religion, science, showmanship, and the promise of direct communication with the dead. The movement it exploded in popularity in the decades leading up to the Civil War as Americans became fascinated with the séances and the spirit communication, just mind body mysteries, and really after the Civil War is it took off because you got to think there's a lot of grief, a lot of sadness. People were sending their children, their husbands, up north to the South to die in the Civil War. A lot of guys didn't come back. Like Abraham Lincoln said, it's about the arithmetic. If the North had the men, they could send them down, and eventually they would win the war, and they did. So there's a lot of just grief and just people they want answers. There's no closure. If your husband, if you're from say Michigan and he went down to fight and he died in Chickamauga or Nashville, one of the battles, Vicksburg, there's no closure. He just doesn't come home. So people who lost loved ones, they gravitated to spiritualism. It was a form of closure. It helped them grieve. It was a big thing. America was exploding, rapid western expansion. People were stepping outside the box with religion. It was a spectacle. It was a movement, and it catered to fringe beliefs. It appeared to the grieving and also the curious. It offered comfort and proof of an afterlife in a century of epidemics, war, and you got to think a lot of people died at early ages. People weren't living to be 80, 90 years old like they are today. So where it all stems from, in 1848, Maggie and Kate Fox of Hydesville, New York, they claimed they were communicating with a dead peddler through rapping sounds in their home. A newspaper reporter heard about it, and he came and witnessed it one night. They wrote a story, they published it, and it took off. Crowds flocked to the Fox's home to watch what was going on. Spiritualism had gained legitimacy because the Fox sisters, they took their act on tour, performing in parlors. They rented halls and theaters. Their seances, it launched an industry, table tipping, slate writers, trance mediums, spirit photography, materialization mediums, people who claim they can produce actual physical ghosts. It's all because of the Fox sisters and what they did in the 1840s in New York. Well, by the 1850s, 1880s, traveling mediums were a full-blown entertainment circuit. Mediums advertised in newspapers. They rented opera houses, other venues. They toured like vaudeville acts. Well, their shows, it blended parlor magic, public confessionals, psychic readings, elaborate light and shadow tricks. But the thing is, many of them were exposed as frauds. But audiences kept coming. Even skeptics wanted to witness the spectacle. People, it's like Ghostbusters, were ready to believe you. People wanted to believe in something, and it was, like I said, it offered closure. It was a way to grieve. And also, it was kind of entertainment. You knew it's like professional wrestling. It's all worked. But still, though, it's kind of a spectacle. It's entertainment. How are they going to pull this off? What's going to be the next storyline? What are they going to do next? So it's kind of like what spiritualism played into. But there were people that they couldn't quite debunk. So, and this is where I found this character in St. Louis. His name is Dr. Jules Wallace. And he claimed he was the great life reader. Like if, like I go back to wrestling again, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, the barber was his gimmick. Jules Wallace, his gimmick was the great life reader. That's what he had on his calling card. It's what he had in the newspaper. His story was he was born in Ireland and he was trained by mystics in Australia. He was a world-renowned spiritualist. He traveled the world and he communed with spirit guides through various means. He could use slate writing. He mostly used, it's called a spirit cabinet or a magnetic cabinet. So Dr. Wallace, his first day in town in St. Louis, 1893, he strolls through downtown and he walks into the office of the local newspaper there, the St. Louis Globe-Dispatch. Excuse me, sir, I want to place an ad in your paper. Oh, sure, buddy, what are you selling? Well, I produce spirits in my boarding house, 50 cents to attend. What? Jules Wallace, he pays the salesman the money, and the next day they run an ad in the paper from the great life reader, Jules Wallace. He's holding demonstrations in his boarding house for spiritualism. He called it magnetism. He produced the spirits with magnetism. He used magnetic energy to produce the spirits in his demonstrations. And he bought these eye-catching newspaper ads, and people, you got to think that back then there's no internet, there's no television. People, the word got around through the newspapers. It's how you got your word out. But he used bold claims to build a following, and from the start, he leaned into Victorian America's obsession with séances and spirit cabinets. Well, he rented a spot in his boarding house, and he charged some money to attend. And that night, he dressed all in black. He had an assistant who stood at the door, took the money, and he asked each person to write the name of a loved one they wanted to speak to and seal it in an envelope. Well, Dr. Wallace, he was dressed in all black. He walked the room, shook hands, tried to read the people's faces, and engage the guest. Well, that night during the demonstration, he would call out names of loved ones for people in the audience. I mean, how does this guy know this stuff? People would react. They would freak out. One lady would scream when he said that her dead son was there. A lady had lost a little boy, 4 or 5 years old, and he was telling her this boy's name and some details, and she just started screaming. He delivered messages from the other side. So word's getting around St. Louis, hey, this guy, he's legit. He's doing something special in his boarding house. Well, Dr. Wallace, his boarding house is too small to accommodate all these people, so he rents a bigger venue. So that night, he's kind of doing the same thing, working the room. He's calling out loved ones who are trying to communicate with those in attendance. Well, as he's wrapping things up, he calls out that there's a lady named Mary Helen Potts, whose husband, who had just been convicted in New York for poisoning her with morphine. As he's winding up his demonstration, he goes into a trance, and he yells out that her husband is innocent, and that Mary Helen wants to clear his name. So people there in the demonstration, they're kind of putting 2 and 2 together. Oh my goodness, he's talking about the Potts case up in New York. So the reporters rushed, and they write about this, and it doesn't just make news in St. Louis, it makes news in Chicago, New Orleans. The wire services get a hold of it, and it goes all over the country that Jules Wallace in St. Louis has cleared the guy who killed his wife in New York. Because you got to think, though, these murder cases in New York, they kind of make headlines everywhere. So Jules Wallace, he makes a declaration on stage and it collapses. In this performance, it triggered national attention. I told you, it made all the papers. Letters flooded the prison and demanded the man's release. So you can imagine being, the warden there at the prison, and there's a medium in St. Louis says he's guilty, or says he's not guilty. You probably just wad the paper up and throw it in the trash can. But anyway, whatever the audience believe, the publicity, it made Jules Wallace a star. I mean, he's really garnered the attention. So he has another next demonstration. I told you he was doing the mediums were doing performances or demonstrations in parlors. So these rich upper crust folks in their big lavish mansions, they would like to entertain guests. So what's a way to entertain them? You hire the medium to come to your home and sit in your parlor and do your stuff there in your house. So that night he brought his spirit cabinet. First time he really broke it out. In a spirit cabinet, it's like a 5x5 or 10x10 wooden structure and has curtains on each side. And he called it his spirit cabinet. It was a magnetic cabinet. There's different names. Every medium called it something different. So, like before, the attendees wrote names and questions on cards, and they sealed them in envelopes. His second took them, and that night, Wallace, he asked the group to start singing hymns, and he explained that people, the spirits on the other side, they want to hear songs they knew in life, and it will draw them closer to our world. So that night he goes into the magnetic cabinet as the group sang the hymns. And as he's in there, a ghostly child, it's pitch black, they kill the lights. This glowing, ethereal, ghostly child walks out and starts speaking to the room. A few minutes later, the child fades away, and this islander spirit, I guess like a native primitive spirit named Louis appears. And Louis tells the group that he is there to help guide the other spirits over. He's like a conduit, and he will draw their departed loved ones into this realm. People screamed, they cried. One lady, she talked about her husband. Well, this man appears, this glowing man, and he reached out, and she tried to hug him, and she said he's ice cold, and she just drew back and like shuddered and started crying. She actually fainted. So he's producing these figures. Some people are hugging them. Well, Jules Wallace, he delivers the impossible, and he's like hitting all the beats emotionally of these people. So reporters in the back are watching and taking notes, and these are being published in the paper every single day. Jules Wallace is doing this, Dr. Wallace has done that. He's drawing these spirits, these glowing beings are walking out of the cabinet, and they're speaking to his guest. So he goes from venue to venue. He's like I said, he's getting a following, and he's leveling up. He's going to bigger venues. So one night he's doing a demonstration. I think it was like Cooper Hall was the venue. It's a small little venue, or it's not really small, but it wasn't the biggest in town. He's doing his demonstration. All of a sudden, this charismatic, well-dressed guy walks to the stage. Dr. Wallace looks down, kind of thinking, hey, who are you? And this guy introduces himself as Professor Alexander J. McCaver Tyndal. He explains that he is a mind reader, a hypnotist, and a palmist. He is the seventh son of a seventh son. He's passing through St. Louis on his way to the Chicago World's Fair that's happening in a few months. So he tells Wallace, hey, you're a fraud. You're a fraud, and I can prove it. So Dr. Wallace, he said, okay, if you can do what I can do, I'll pull out a gun and I'll shoot myself on stage in front of everybody. And Professor Tyndal said, no, sir, I don't want you to die, but I can prove that you're a fraud, you're a fake. So they kind of go back and forth with some banter, and they decide, hey, I tell you what, if you want to go to the Opera House tomorrow night, let's see if you can do what I can do. I'll put you through the paces, and if you can do what I can do, I'll leave the town forever. I'll never come back. And the same goes for you. If you can't do what I can do, you have to leave and you don't come back. It's kind of like in wrestling. I know I keep going back to these wrestling kind of comparisons, but like back in the old days, there's like loser leaves town. You have these matches, and someone would lose, and you got to leave the town. You can't come back. So that's kind of like what they're about to do the next night. So the next night they go to the Hagen Opera House in St. Louis, and it's packed to the rafters. The place is just jam packed. When Professor Tyndal challenged Wallace, the reporters are seeing all this and they're writing about it. So the next day in the paper, this is published. It's headline news. This mind reader from London has called out Jules Wallace, and he's, it's WrestleMania. It's Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior. They're going to go at it at the Hagen Opera House. So it's packed. Everybody in St. Louis is coming to see what's going to happen with these two mediums going head to head. So the building is packed with more than 1,000 people. The atmosphere was electric. Some were expecting a miracle. Some thought it was going to be a fist fight. It wasn't just entertainment. It was like civic theater. This was a duel. A duel is probably the best way to really explain it. So that night, at exactly 8 o'clock p.m., the curtain rose, and two musicians were playing. There's a guy played a mandolin, someone was playing a guitar. They just played some music as the curtain rose and kind of like start the evening. The crowd roared. Dr. Wallace walked out first, and he was confident. He announced that the test he and his challenger would perform would astonish anyone. And then Professor Tyndal took the stage, and of course they booed him. But he immediately went for Wallace's throat. He said all mediums are frauds, and he could replicate anything that Jules Wallace did. He said he could hypnotize people and read thoughts, and that Wallace simply pretended to talk to the dead. So naturally, Wallace is huffing and puffing. He's just, staring a hole through Tyndal. So the room was kind of split by this point. Some were kind of rooting for Tyndal. Some were rooting for Wallace. Yeah, I told you, Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and you're rooting for both guys. It's who's going to win. So, but yeah, this is Victorian era trash talk. But it was dead serious. Both guys wanted to come out on top. So Wallace, he got to start first, and he wanted to really establish his dominance. He claimed to be communicating with the spirit. He said there was a man there, and finally the name came to his head, and he said its name is Ross Weeder. And a lady in the balcony screamed and fainted because she was somebody she knew. Jules Wallace rushed over to her, and he attended to her. And then he said that another spirit was calling him, trying to communicate and tell him something. He said there was someone in attendance named Wash Stevenson. Wash is a strange woman's name, but Mrs. Stevenson, he picked up the spirits, told him that Miss Stevenson had been a detective working with the police, but she left the profession to go start a family, and she missed being a detective. Well, the woman, she fainted, and she burst into tears and fainted, and then Wallace goes over to her, and she admitted, hey, this is true. I used to be a police detective, and I miss it. I want to go back. I have a family now. So the audience just gasped. They can't believe that he's pulling just this stuff out of the air about these people in attendance. So Dr. Wallace, then he dramatically pulled a sealed envelope from his pocket. And supposedly the envelope had been mailed from Boston and opened in front of Tyndal. And this was supposed to be a test. He pressed the envelope to his forehead, and he claimed he could see what was inside. He showed it to someone in the audience. They both admitted it was sealed and he couldn't see it. And he went to he had this vision. He said there was a woman holding a lilac bouquet. And he asked Tyndal, hey, does England have lilacs there? And Tyndal just laughs like, hey, I have lilacs on my calling card. You probably just saw one of those. Jules just shook his head. No. He said, there's a family grave under a lilac tree. And he kind of squinted and he kind of rubbed his head. He's coming to him. He said, the name I'm picking up on the tombstone is James Sampson. It's carved there on the stone. And Professor Tyndal, he begrudgingly admitted, hey, Sampson was a family name. I have relatives by the name of Sampson. And then Dr. Wallace is saying, oh, hang on a second. I'm picking up Carrie, that is your grandmother. And Rose Tyndal, your cousin. He's calling out these family members from Tyndal, and Tyndal's kind of looking around like, hey, how do you know this stuff? And he said, well, how did you not, your grandmother, Carrie, she wanted to know why you didn't predict the failure of that bank in Denver where you put your money, and the bank went under. And Tyndal's like, well, hey, it's true. How did you know that? I lost some money when the bank closed in Denver. Well, and then he kept reading his mind, supposedly, and he's like, well, look, I'm picking up, there's a shipwreck. The ship, it's at sea, there's a storm, and it wrecks. And there's a man, he's on an island, he's by himself, he's going crazy. Oh, he's rescued. Tyndal's kind of looking like, okay, what's going on? How do you know this? He said, oh, and Rose, she's such a beautiful bride. Oh, wow, she's a lovely young lady. She's getting married to the man of her dreams. Oh, she's going to say, I do. She's going to get married and have a family. Oh, my goodness. Oh, who is the man with the gun? Rose, she's been shot. And Tyndal, he just freezes. He starts stuttering. Tears well in his eyes. And he admits in front of Dr. Wallace, like, hey, Rose was my cousin. And she was shot by my uncle on her wedding day. He was in a shipwreck. He went mad. They shouldn't have invited him, but he went crazy, and that day he shot her and killed her on her wedding day. And the crowd's just like, what? So then once Tyndal kind of gets his bearings, he's really shook up with these admissions that Wallace is telling him about his family, the family's deepest, darkest secrets. So 8 members of the audience were brought on stage, and they put a blindfold on Professor Tyndal, and he just walks down the line, and he's told to touch each person's hand. Wallace tells him, hey, one of the ladies here, one of the 8 women he's put in these chairs, one of them has recently lost a child. Find out who it is by touching their hand. So Tyndal, he goes up and down the line. He's touching each hand, trying to just pick up whether or not one of these ladies is grieving. And he goes down the line, and then afterwards he points to the lady and takes his blindfold off. Hey, this lady here lost her child. The lady starts crying, and he's right. How did you know that? So then Dr. Wallace said, okay, well, I'll tell you what. I hid a pin under a chair before the demonstration tonight. Go find it. And so the crowd, they're all kind of shuffling, looking around. Hey, he's under my chair. Tyndal went down the aisles, and he goes down each aisle, and he's kind of looking around. Finally, he stops in front of a man and says, hey, would you please look under your seat? And right there, the man reached under his pen, stuck to the bottom of his chair. The crowd roared. So 2 volunteers were called on stage, and Dr. Wallace, he put the blindfold on Tyndal, and they told Tyndal to turn around backwards, make sure he couldn't see. And so Wallace does, he gives one of the guys a feather. He said, I want you to recreate this scene from a play. And the guys start stabbing each other with the feather. There's some kind of old-timey play that Wallace had seen. So then Tyndal turns around, take the blindfold off. Says, okay, I want you to go recreate what these 2 guys just did. Of course, he has no idea what's going on. Well, he walks down into the audience. I got back at Wallace took the feather and gave it to someone in the audience. Tyndal walks down into the audience. He walks over to the lady with the feather, takes it out of her hat, walks back to the stage, starts poking Wallace with it like he's stabbing him. And the crowd's going bananas. How does this guy know what Wallace is doing? Tyndal's looking like he's the real supernatural force, and he knows he has the spirits on his side. So at this point, Wallace is getting frustrated. He's kind of stomping around on stage. He knows he's about to lose. He said, okay, I tell you what, there's an audience member that I've given a cigar to. Go find it. So Tyndal goes down to the crowd, and he just kind of paces the room, walking around. He's kind of looking like he's lost. He doesn't really know where is his cigar. So finally, he comes to a stop, and he taps the man on the shoulder and is like, sir, the guy behind you has a cigar in his pocket. Can you get it for me? The guy turns around, the guy hands him a cigar, and the crowd's going bananas. Tyndal has showed up Wallace. Wallace, he's the fraud, he's the fake, and Tyndal, he's the real deal. So at that point, Tyndal, he's walking, he's just cocky. He's strutting back to the stage. He starts climbing the stairs to go back on the stage, and Wallace is just staring him down. Tyndal, he's like a victorious prize fighter. He's holding his hands up. He's celebrating. He's climbing the stairs. All of a sudden, Tyndal falls to the ground in a heap. Just boom. He collapses. He starts convulsing, thrashing violently on the floor. The crowd is gasping. A physician rushes the stage and tries to tend to Tyndal, thinking he's dying. So Wallace, the whole time, is just strutting at the top of the stage, just pacing back and forth, just glaring. He's laughing. He's raising his hands like he won the prize fight, raising his fist up in the air. He's the man. So as this is going on, Wallace is just strutting, and he is celebrating as the doctor's attending to Tyndal. The crowd's going nuts. Someone on the front row goes, that's not fair. You hypnotized him. Well, that's when things get really crazy. A few men rush the stage, and they're trying to tackle Wallace. Well, one of Wallace's assistants rushes out and gives him a gun. Wallace holds up the gun and keeps the guys at bay. The manager of the theater rushes out, of the opera house rushes out. He closes the curtains. Wallace and his assistant, they run to the back, jump out a window, run off downtown back to Wallace's boarding house. Well, Tyndal goes back to the back with the doctor, and finally, maybe an hour later, Tyndal wakes up, and he turns to the doctor and he said, is that man still staring at me? This made front page news, not in St. Louis. It made news in St. Louis, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, New Orleans. This was front page news everywhere. How did these 2 mediums, how did Wallace how did he knock this guy out standing on stage? In the papers, reporters going to see Wallace. Oh, well, I didn't hypnotize him. I have the ability, but I didn't. It's just I'm not sure what happened. Well, so what happens is 2 weeks later, Tyndal and Wallace, they agree to meet again in another venue in downtown St. Louis. And what happens is they do the same show the same way. They're working together. So once people kind of start reading about what happened, how the shows are exactly the same, they realize, hey, it is like pro wrestling. Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, they were working with each other. So yeah, it was a feud staged to sell tickets, and they made a ton of money. I'm sure they split it both ways. And after that, Tyndall left town, but Wallace is he's a smart guy. He's so clever, but he stayed in St. Louis, and he should have left. So as this is going on, the whispers of fraud, reporters, police, and skeptics are pressing in all around him. And so one night, Wallace and one of his assistant, they're in a tavern, and they meet a guy who works for the city recorder. He's telling Wallace the stuff about his family, and it's not legit. So a lot of times what Wallace would do is he would go to the taverns, saloons, him and his assistant, they'd walk around, they wouldn't drink. They would listen to all the drunk people talk about their problems, and they'd use that on stage. So one night, the guy's telling Wallace about his problems. Well, he has no problems at all. So the next night, he goes on stage, starts talking about whatever the guy told him, and it's all fake. They start pointing it out to him. Well, around this time, a young music teacher became obsessed with Dr. Wallace, and he wanted to learn how to use magnetism too. Well, Wallace charged him a whole lot of money for magnetic instruction, quote unquote, but the family was furious. He was paying a whole lot of money. The guy went bankrupt because he gave all his money to Wallace. Well, the family went to the mayor, and the newspapers pounced on the story, and Dr. Wallace was charged with fraud. Well, it didn't take long. He finally skipped town. Well, so how was he doing all this stuff, right? So the glowing beings in the spirit cabinet, what he'd do is he would get this cheesecloth and he would knit together a suit that he could wear, and he would soak it in wine, paint, and phosphorus, and it created this luminous, ghost-like, glowing figure in the dark. He also had actors in the audience, like he had seconds who would, if he would call out a name and no one reacted to it, someone in the audience would step up, oh, that's my uncle. So he had a way to cover himself if someone gave him false information or if he said a wrong name. I told you that a lady hugged one of the ghosts. What he did was he bought these gloves and he set them on ice before the show. So he wanted someone to come up there and hug him because he wanted to feel the cold, make him seem like he was legitimately producing these spirits who naturally are going to be cold. And another trick he would do, I told you his guests would write names and questions on cards and give them to his second or his assistant when they came. He would soak those. He had like a sponge that had been soaking in alcohol in his jacket pocket. So before he came on stage, you get the cards from his assistant, and he would rub them against the alcohol and briefly look at them before he went to his cabinet and kind of know what the questions are going to be about. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a talented fraud. He used a blend of magic, technique, psychology, acting, and showmanship. Like I told you, he vanished. He left with $9,000 in banknotes and $400 in cash. He told a friend on his way out of town, if I'm a faker, I'm the prince of them all. So what happened was he moved to Washington, D.C. He did the same act there for a little while. Eventually, he was found out. He went to New York. While he was in New York, he was doing performances. He started to get a little traction there. Well, someone who was in St. Louis a month or two before recognized him being in the papers and went to police. The police, they went to one of his shows, and he skipped town. He drifted west. He went to Houston, Texas, and that's kind of when things go cold. No one knows what happened to him. 1896, there's no more recordings of Jules Wallace in America. And I think what happened was he probably just changed his name. And as they're investigating this guy, they find out his real name was Pat Kerwin. He wasn't Irish, not Australian. He wasn't a mystic. He was a performer. He was from San Francisco, the Bay Area. He started doing his demonstrations there. He actually got found out in San Francisco, went to Denver. He went to Denver, and one of his assistants got drunk in the bar and started talking about how they did their tricks, and he got run out of Denver. That's when he came to St. Louis. So, yeah, it's fascinating, the story of Jules Wallace. So, Tyndal, I told you, I have a book called Sausage King. It's about the Adolf Lukert murder trial, 1893. So, during that trial, it was actually, the murder was 1893, the trial was 1896, 1897. Professor Tyndal shows up in Chicago trying to interject himself into this murder case. He tells the police, hey, if I can interview Adolf Lukert, I can get him to confess to murdering his wife. I can read his mind. I'll get him to spill his guts. So it's funny that Tyndal started off as a charlatan, but he actually ends up working with police departments all over the country trying to solve cases with his psychic ability. He actually helped solve cases in Michigan. So it's really wild that Tyndall's able to do this stuff, even though he's pretending he can't. I don't know. But yeah, Tyndall's a fascinating guy. I may do a show on him at another date. But yeah, the Jules Wallace story, like, it's so bananas. I actually wrote a book just based off him and his story in St. Louis. It's called Jules Wallace, The Great Life Reader. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, Audible Premium. Just go to Amazon, type in Jules Wallace. It should pop up. It's one of my favorite books. I mean, I love all my books. I've got over 40 of them. Like I was telling somebody, I love all my children equally. You know, some, like, I have one that's good at basketball. I have one who's, you know, good at racing cars. But Jules Wallace is my favorite book. It's just so bananas what this guy did. And I actually kind of want to make it into like I have this one, Jules Wallace, Great Life Reader. I actually want to make a prequel that goes back and talks about his early days, and then do one where eventually he gets popped. But yeah, Jules Wallace, Great Life Reader. Go check that out. Also, Monster City Madhouse. Hey, every day it's Halloween over there. They specialize in premium Halloween and classic horror shirts with a vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing available. Hext makes some great stocking stuff from my Voodoo Doctor book. Check it out. Also, the show. Hey, leave us a review on Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, wherever you found us. Leave us a review. Subscribe. Tell a buddy, and let us know, what you think. Leave us some comments. Check back. Got some more ghost stories next week. I'm actually going to head to Alabama, do some fun stuff in Alabama. I've got the Alabama book. I've got some weird, wild stuff, the Alabama White thing. But yeah, check back next time. It's going to be a fun show. I'll see you guys then.